We're coming now to the very end of chapter 4, and this is the place where the Samaritans themselves believe in Jesus Christ. Let me read to you from verse 39. Many of the Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me everything I ever did. So when the Samaritans came to him, they urged him to stay with them, and he stayed for 2 days. And because of his words, many more became believers. They said to the woman, "Yes, we will no longer believe just because of what you said. Now we've heard him for ourselves, and we know that this man really is the Saviour of the world." People can believe for all kinds of reasons, but usually because of a witness who testifies to them. And when this woman went to the town and spoke to the town's people, she proclaimed this person out by the well a remarkable and amazing and unusual person, someone who was worthy to be heard, someone who they ought to come and speak to. She claimed him to have a supernatural insight into her own life. He said and told me everything that I ever did. Only a prophet could have that kind of knowledge, because only a prophet is in contact with God, and only God knows the hearts and the lives of all men. So, at the very least, this person that was in front of her, Jesus Christ, was at least a prophet from God, and she proclaimed him as such to all the people that she spoke to. So impressed was she with his words, and those words were words which were above the normal use of words, this metaphoric language continually being put forward here in a way which ordinary earthly people didn't normally grasp. But nevertheless it awoke in her an understanding of living water, of life, of a truth which was something which she had only dimly grasped before. But whatever it was that she saw in Jesus, it shook her, it changed her, and it made her go out to everybody that she knew and proclaim this person possibly to be Jesus Christ, the Christ of God, the Messiah. Now, that obviously had an effect. People knew who she was. They took her for granted that she spoke sensible words. Otherwise, if they didn't, they wouldn't have come out to see Jesus for themselves. Many of them believed that Jesus was indeed the Christ, the Messiah, simply on account of what the woman had told them. And many occasions you find that people do believe in Jesus purely because of reported speech. Because that's, after all, why people like Paul went around preaching Jesus Christ. They'd never met him for themselves, but they believed the reports that were given. And in fact, all the way down through history, that's been the way in which Jesus Christ has been accepted by others as the centre of a person's faith, through the preaching of the gospel to other people. This woman could be considered, if you like, probably the very first preacher of the gospel, telling other people about Jesus, and people believing through what she said as to him being the Christ. And yet, there is no better way than a personal encounter with Christ, which is what these people came to see. They met with him, and so impressed were they with what he said and the way he spoke. And don't forget, there's a big gap between an ordinary worldly way of speaking, the way that Jesus spoke to people. That gap was appreciated and understood by some, to the extent that they urged him to stay. They didn't want him to leave. He was just passing through. He would be gone within an hour or two, but he managed to stay there for 2 days. Why? Because the harvest was ripe, because people were hungry to hear what he had to say. They too were entranced and captivated by the sheer magnetic character of Jesus Christ and by the words that he taught them. That's remarkable in and of itself. It's a testimony to the character and nature of Jesus Christ. But it's also a testimony to people as well. And there's a kind of it almost seems like an implicit put down for this woman, Yeah, well, you did testify about this man Jesus, but now we've heard him for ourselves. Maybe it's not a put down, maybe it's an endorsement of what you said. Maybe that's a better way of looking at it. We endorse what you said. You claim that this guy was the Christ, was the Messiah, and we agree with you. We've heard him for ourselves, and we add our testimony, therefore, to your testimony. We add our belief to your belief. We add our acclamation and maybe even our worship to the worship that you have for this man. It must have been a rather sad day when Jesus did finally leave after just 2 days of teaching. You can imagine people hanging on his every word, listening to him. Please stay in our city. Please stay in our town. All the barriers here between Samaritans and Jews had gone. They'd all been broken down. For him to stay 2 days, he had to have stayed in the house of a Samaritan. He'd had to have stayed somewhere where Jews would not normally stay, where they would not be welcome. But the presence of Jesus was enough to break down the barriers between Samaritans and Jews, between men and women, male and female, between slave and free, between Greek and non-Greek, between Jews and Gentiles. I think there's a real implicit truth here that whereas, particularly in this day and age, we're so keen on building up our silos of identifying our particular group and to holding on to that and saying that that's the most important thing about us. Identity politics has taken such a hold. It's quite clear that here Jesus demolishes the barriers that identity politics brings up and sets up and seeks to set one group against another, to seek to have one group exploit another or be over another. None of that is of any consequence as far as Jesus Christ is concerned. The barrier between Samaritan and Jew had gone by the time that Jesus had left. A day is coming when you will not worship God on this mountain or in Jerusalem, in the temple. A day is coming when the division between Samaritan and Jew will no longer exist. A day is coming when all who are of a spiritual mind will worship God together, regardless of race or colour or sexual orientation or whatever else it is that divides human beings one from another. Regardless of any of that, everyone will worship God together in spirit and in truth. And it's all brought about because we believe, they said, that this man is the saviour not of just the Jews, but the saviour of the world, someone who therefore unites everybody together. I think that at those days they never thought of the world as a whole. I think it's an unusual concept. They think of save the Jews as a nation, the Samaritans as a nation, as a grouping together, and many other groups which held on to their groupness as being the fundamental importance in their lives. I worship on the mountain. I'm a Samaritan. That distinguishes me. I'm different from everybody else. But those differences are unimportant and irrelevant when it comes to our connection with God, says Jesus. All those differences that we have between us, it doesn't matter where you are, where you've come from, which part of the world you originated in, which race you're from, what colour you are, what sex you are. None of it makes any difference whatsoever, because Jesus Christ is the saviour not of one group or another group, but of the world. People from every group are now united in him, and all those divisions have been destroyed.